So this actually happened to one of my friends while he was babysitting for a neighbor's kid. We'll call him by the name Logan. Logan needed a part-time job as a babysitter since the job he worked at only gave him at least 3 days of work and the pay wasn't really much. This was around the time back in 2017 when he had gotten a job at a retail store, but they only paid him a certain amount and hours had been cut since then. This resulted in him having to need to find a different job. Now Logan decided to take up the opportunity to be a babysitter, which it pays pretty decently well. So Logan ended up babysitting for one neighbor's kid, which of course her name was Sally. Sally was about maybe 6 years old, and while she did have autism as well as ADHD, Logan could handle her since he had a brother that had those issues as well, so he was on the same boat as the parents. Logan took Sally to a park that was nearby by the school, which was not far from where she lived, so they went there and they were playing at the park. It was around close to nighttime, which was around the time when Sally had to be getting ready for bed and eating dinner. It was sometime in the spring, so it was a bit bitter and chilly outside. While Logan was on his phone texting his girlfriend, he looked up and saw that Sally was playing by the swings, and not far from her stood a clown. Now, the clown looked up to be holding balloons, and he wasn't so sure if this person was pranking or maybe if it was someone trying to do something dangerous. Sally goes up to the clown and starts talking with him. That's when Logan put his phone away to stand up, ready to act if it need necessary. Sally started asking the clown questions, and the clown seemed to be pretty nice, and he said, "You know, I got some more balloons in my car. We can go and get some," he said. Now, before Sally could go with the clown, that's when Logan stepped in and told the clown that they were just leaving and to have a nice night. Of course, that's when the clown frowned a little bit, like a kid who can't have a toy or anything they wanted. He walked back to his car and drove off. Now, Sally wasn't so sure as to why the clown wanted her to follow him to his car, but Logan said that it's very dangerous and that clown might have had the attempt to kidnap her if she didn't look, or he didn't look to see what was happening. Of course, he ended up telling the parents when they got back home that night after Sally went to bed about what happened. But of course, the parents thanked them for acting immediately, while saying that this does not happen very often, as the city where Logan's from, crime is very rare up there. Now, as of this day, Logan never babysat for Sally again, and still to this day, he even wonders what was this clown's intentions on doing. Had he planned to kidnap her, rob Logan as well? The possibilities are endless. But Logan never babysat for Sally again, and he still wonders if that clown is still there in town, but he hasn't seen him since. Now, this was about 4 or 5 years ago. It actually happened to a friend of mine who happened to be a babysitter. She was in college and she needed a babysitting job to pay her debts as well, not her debt, but pretty much pay for a lot of things. Such as this college was expensive, she had to get a student loan, which of course she had to pay it by a certain time. That's when she started taking the job as a babysitter, and it was helping her pay off the student loan. As she was paying, something really freaky happened while she was babysitting. Now, for context, I'll give her the name Katie. She was around 21. She was living in with her parents as the college didn't live too far, so she mostly walked there. Occasionally she drove there if she had to do stuff for her family after. But however, Katie was He was one of the sweetest college students you can ever ask for. She she basically was watching YouTube videos while babysitting for the neighbor's kid, which happened to be Victoria. Now, Victoria was a little old for babysitting, which she was around 9 years old, as some people may argue is too young, too old for a babysitter. That's when she was on her phone texting her boyfriend when all of a sudden Victoria said that she heard something coming from the basement. Now, this really prompted to get Katie to stand up, and she walked over to the basement and looked. There was nothing really down there, which of course Victoria said that she swore she heard someone down in the basement. She went down to the basement and have a look, but when she looked over, she could see that there was some sort of mess. There were beer bottles, wrappers, and even some cigarette butts on the ground. Someone had been living in the basement, and the parents don't really go down there except if they're doing laundry. Now, of course, that's when Katie ended up calling the police, and the police arrived, but however, they didn't see anyone in the basement, and it turns out there was a cellar door that led outside, and it had gotten in with the key. Now, this is why the parents now ended up boarding that up just to avoid anyone from coming down to the basement. What's even more shocking is that the parents found out that that person, whoever it was, could have been a homeless person, had been living in the basement for God knows how long. Katie never babysat for Victoria again, and she still wonders if that man was ever caught or not. It turns out that he was doing this to other houses as well, and he is around maybe his 40s, maybe early 50s. There's still no explanation as to why he had been living in basements of houses, but of course Katie does not even want to know what the alternative would be if she ever found him in the basement. She never babysat for Victoria since 2018, and she still wonders today what could have happened if that person happens to have seen Katie. So, for a bit of context, this actually happened to one of my friends named Stephanie, and she was babysitting for 2 kids. One was around 9 years old, as some people may think that it's a little old for a babysitter, while another child was around maybe 4 years old. Their names were Darren and Anthony, and they were really great boys. Anthony was the oldest, while Darren was about maybe 4 years old, just started kindergarten. At the time of the story, that was when the parents were living in Chicago. Now, a friend of mine who happened to be a babysitter who was living in Chicago, we will call her by the name Jessie. Now, Jessie lived in a not a really great place in Chicago, so crimes were often to happen. But however, this story would definitely be really crazy. It is a little hard to tell about this story, but it is definitely one you can never be too careful on. Now, Jessie was pretty much on her laptop doing some schoolwork when Anthony and Darren said that they heard some noises coming from the basement. Now they really go in the basement sometimes to do some gaming, which they thought that maybe it could have been something falling over, or maybe the cat was in the basement, or maybe perhaps the dog. So Jessie got up and went down the basement and turned on the light, but she couldn't see anyone. She ended up looking around the basement, making sure that there was no one living there, as a few homeless people had managed to sneak into Darren and Anthony's house in the past. So that was actually a creepy experience. However, as Jessie was down there, she ended up looking over to see that there wasn't anyone there, but there was some sort of box of Legos. Suddenly, whatever it was pushed it forward, and the box of Legos ended up falling to the ground. That's when Jesse started to get a little frustrated, thinking that maybe it was Darren, maybe pulling a prank on her, but it wasn't him, and it wasn't St. Anthony. She continued to look around when all of a sudden the lights started to flicker. This really scared her, as she didn't even know if this was just a prank or some sort of power surge. She ended up going up to the back up the basement and locking the door. Not really locking it, but shutting it for the night. It still really freaks her out to this day as to who or what was in the basement. But she would like to think whatever was downstairs with her that day was completely paranormal.